Hi everybody, this is David, and we're continuing on with letters this week. Now, this week we're going to start focusing on the more detailed aspects of interpretation. Up to this point in the previous lectures, we were really looking at interpreting letters from a big picture perspective. So we talked about interpreting a letter as far as knowing the overall structure and overall content and the overall purpose of the entire letter. And really, what I was trying to convince you of last week is that that's really the ultimate goal of interpreting a letter, to know the overall purpose, content, and flow of thought. So before we move on to how to interpret the finer details like words and phrases and sentences, I kind of want to reiterate why I'm putting the big picture first and emphasizing that, and then moving on to these finer details, how to interpret words, phrases, and sentences. Now, the biggest reason is, like I already said, I think the ultimate purpose is understanding the big picture concept of a letter. Even if you know the finer details, like if you can parse every Greek word in a letter, or if you can understand each individual phrase within the letter, but if you don't know the overall content, purpose, and flow of thought, then you don't understand the letter. So the reason I start with this big picture first, and that's why we did that in the first videos, was because that's ultimately the most important thing. The other reason why I put that first is because even when you're mostly or primarily interested in studying individual words or phrases and sentences within a letter, the biggest asset you can have in interpreting those is knowing the overall content, purpose, and flow of thought of a letter. It is by far the most important thing, even if you're primarily interested in knowing what a word means. That's going to be your biggest asset. So, and for those two reasons, I really want to encourage you to put an emphasis on the big picture first, and then move on to the finer details. And I'm going to add just this one kind of disclaimer. That's not always the case. Sometimes, in order to understand the big picture of a letter, you have to deal with some finer details first. But as a rule of thumb, really what you want to get at is understand the big picture first. Okay, so let's start by looking at by words. Before we learn how to do word studies, we really have to understand how words work. That's really the starting place, because if we misunderstand how in language we use words, then we're not going to know how to arrive at a good definition. So let's talk about how words are used. Now, this shouldn't be too foreign, but words mean whatever we make them mean. Hope that doesn't sound too weird, but if you think about it, I don't know if you can see on camera, but I got my dog down here. Here, maybe we'll do this. See, that's a dog. It's actually a Great Dane. Yeah. Now, even though that's what we normally think of when we say that's a dog, I can meet with one of my friends, and if I see him, and for whatever, I don't normally say this to my friends, but I could say, "What's up, dog?" and people would understand exactly what I mean by that. They know I'm not talking about a Great Dane or a Golden Retriever. They know I'm not being derogatory, not necessarily. This could be a close friend of mine, and it could just be a friendly way of saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" or "What's going on in your life?" That's because when I use the word dog, I can mean whatever I want by it. I can mean friend, I can use it derogatorily, or I can mean my Great Dane. And that's true of any word, if you think about it. Innuendos, questionable jokes, make use of this a lot. But in everyday language, we assign whatever meaning we want to any word we want. Now, of course, there's limitations to that. If we want somebody to understand it, then we've got to say it in a way that they know what we mean by that word. But really, we can assign any meaning we want to any word. Second thing is, words don't have definitions. Now, when we were growing up and we were in grade school, if we didn't know a word, we went to a dictionary and looked it up, and there's a sentence and it says, oh, that's what that word means. But that's maybe has led us to subconsciously or maybe even consciously just assume that words have a single definition, or they have a definition. And that's not the case. A word doesn't have a definition. It has a semantic range, which is a fancy way of saying words have a list of typical uses. They don't have a single meaning. They have a a list of usual ways that it's used in common language. Let me bring up dictionary.com here so I can give you an example. I just went to dictionary.com and I typed in the word key, and if you were to ask somebody what is the definition of the word key, you'd probably expect something like what's here: a small metal instrument specially cut to fit into a lock and move its bolts. Good, so that's a key. But the reality is that the word key is used in a lot more than just that fashion. In fact, dictionary.com lists about 33 different ways it can be used as a noun. It can be used as an adjective. It lists 10 different ways it can be used as a verb. 3 more ways it can be used as in a verb phrase. And then there's finally an idiom, the power of the keys. So as you can see, the word key can mean a lot of different things. It has a large semantic range, and so when we go use the word key, we can mean it not just as a key to door. For example, I can say I keyed that guy's car. To key someone's car doesn't mean to unlock a door. It means you took a key and scratched up the paint. You can also be talking about the key on a keyboard, or the key idea of a lecture. So words don't have definitions, they have semantic ranges. Now, some words have a smaller semantic range in that we don't use them in a lot of different ways, and some words can mean almost anything. And in everyday usage, we just use them in a lot of different ways, like the word key here. But anyway, words don't have definitions, they have semantic ranges. The last thing to know about how words work is that when a speaker or author uses a word, he or she assumes that you or his or her audience has enough information to know what he or she means by that usage. So for example, even though there's 33 ways of understanding what the word key means, if I tell you, hey, grab that key, I'm assuming that even though there's 33 different ways of typical usage of the word key, that you know what I mean by it. So I could be pointing at my set of house keys, and I tell my wife, hey, grab that key, and she knows. I assume that she knows what she means by it. If I say, hey, push that key, and I'm looking at a keyboard or a key on a piano, I'm assuming when I say that my reader, my audience, or knows enough from the context to know what I mean when I say the key. Now, we're not the original audience or the intended audience in the New Testament letters. So even though Paul is assuming that the Corinthians, or whoever whatever the author is speaking of, and whoever the audience is, the author is assuming that the audience knows exactly what he means by it, whether it's because of the context of the letter itself or the context of life in general. They share enough cultural background to where he can use a word and know that they know exactly what he means by it. That's not necessarily true for us. We're coming 2,000 years later. We don't share the same cultural context, and so sometimes we don't know what he means.